have 3 of them abroad who have provided even the medical records of after they were released, they went to government doctors and got a record of what had happened to them. So Iranian government's denial of that really doesn't have any grounds, and they are really afraid of it most because it inflames the religious passions of their base. To think that, I think they would tell themselves, well, if we beat our opponents, put them in solitary confinement, so on, the really faithful will understand we have to do that for the sake of God. But they really have a hard time looking them in the eye and say, yeah, we also had to rape them, for the sake of God. The head of the parliament, it is sad, and really if it was not tragic, it should have belonged to somewhere else. But the head of the parliament in August admitted that they had received 100 complaints of rape in detention. But within 2 days, he came out and he said, we looked at all of them. None of them have any basis. Within 2 days. That is the level of impunity within the system. So where are we now? Where we are since Ashura, since December 27th, has really become another echo into the 1980s, in the sense that I know people who do not go home, who have turned off their mobiles, who are moving from a relative's house in one province to another and debating should they leave the country or not. And that is what really the government would like to see, except that you cannot get 40% of the population get up and leave the country. So we see a wave of activists coming out, but there are still thousands in the country. Since December 27, practically everyone who, I would say, used their pen in newspapers or on the internet to express their views and ideas is in jail. Not because they could tie them to any specific things they did. There is just this mentality within the security and intelligence forces that if we put these people away for at least 3-4 months, keep them in solitary confinement, and really break their soul. The torture that goes on has been physical, but over the past 30 years, the Iranian intelligence services and interrogators, and that will make for a fascinating history when we'll know all the details of it, have come to perfect torturing one's soul. And the solitary confinement is extremely important part of it. When you're in a room for 50 days, and I've had former prisoners tell me that their joy was when the interrogator would come and say, okay, it's time to talk and let's do interrogation, because they had human interaction. But that would go on 3-4 days, and again for 20 days or so. They're just in a small room, the light is always on, and absolute lack of interaction with anyone in the outside world. And then at the same time being told that, well, if you don't cooperate, we'll have your mother come in, we'll have your sister come in. We're capable of that. And very sadly enough, the 19-year-old young man who was executed 2 weeks ago, Arash Rahmanipur, now we know from his father that when they detained him last year before the election, they also detained his 7-month-old pregnant sister and kept her there and told him that she will not leave this place till you cooperate. And that's how he ended up making the confessions he did. So now we have over 1,000 people at least in prisons, with many people underground. Many people have left the country, and yet I've been amazed that for every activist who disappears from the scene by going to prison or being forced to leave the country, there is always 2 or 3 new ones who appears on the scene and starts to make contact. The resilience of the young population and its determination on non-violence pushing its demands is what makes the path of this movement to be almost of historical determinism. It cannot lose. It may take a year, it may take 10 years, but those in power just simply do not have not only the legitimacy, the bare minimum of numbers, I believe, to survive. Let me just say from a good friend who just came back from Iran, and I just met her here, that there are Basij members who have been loyal supporters of the regime, but since the June election and everything that has happened, they simply cannot bring themselves and their conscience to accept the legitimacy of the regime. I cannot confirm, but on Ashura Day, apparently the son of Ali Larijani, the former nuclear negotiator and the current head of the parliament and fairly a hardline politician against the Green Movement, was on the streets and detained. And of course, once they recognized who they had, supposedly they released him after 24 hours. But let's not forget that in summer, the reason we learned about rape and torture and killings in prisons was because one of them was the son of a former Revolutionary Guard commander who did not keep quiet and came forward. And when they turned the body of his 19-year-old son to him, he demanded accountability. And he said he was tortured. He did not die of natural causes the way the prison officials claimed. Of course, he gets his case redressed within the parliament, and there has been no prosecution or anything. But the hundreds of other dead and thousands of detainees and injured have had no recourse to justice. What will happen with the human rights situation very much, of course, depends on the political balance within Iran and what ultimately those who have the power right now, particularly the supreme leader, decides to whether let Ahmadinejad and his faction solidify or not. But we're certainly facing a crisis. It is an emergency. And we're telling the world that, look, your fixation on the nuclear issue, as legitimate as it must be, and this is the reasoning I get all the time from the Iranian colleagues inside Iran, and it's sometimes hard to tell them, well, within the realm of real politics and geopolitics, of course, nuclear proliferation or having a nuclear-armed Iran is the most important thing in everyone's mind. But they maybe naively point out that isn't that entire crisis about observance of an international treaty called the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran is a volunteer signature to multiple such treaties on human rights. Why is no one, at least symbolically, within the international institution holding Iran accountable for its violations of human rights norms and obligations? Maybe they're too naive and they have believed that these human rights treaties really do have meaning, but they're saying we as a nation have believed in them and are putting our trust in them, and we want that to become whatever government comes to power will be respecting them. And that is what we're fighting for, and why no one within the international community takes that as seriously. That message is, of course, starting to get through more and more, but it is a very uphill battle. Let me just finish by focusing on the foreign policy of Obama administration and the more general issue of international communities' attitude or response to human rights emergency in Iran. First, I must say that I really pity the Obama's Iran team and policymakers. He came to power after 8 years of Bush's failed policies and very wrong-headed policies toward Iran, determined to reverse that. And I think he brought a group of people together who had learned from Bush's mistakes and had made some real study of Iran's government structure and society. And with his New Year message of last March and so on, he was starting to really seek a way of negotiation and having relations with Iran. And then, of course, the June elections happened. And everything's turned upside down. It's been a real earthquake with regard to how we should perceive Iran. Everything all those experts, analysts, and Obama's team did and put together has had no relevance, really. And it's taken them a long time to realize that, and I don't know if their natural reaction going to be going back to Bush's policies, which is very wrong-headed. But what they, and this could be just a smokescreen argument they give to people like me, but what they and the European government officials pretend is the issue of human rights in Iran cannot be really addressed by them, or they cannot become too involved and active on it because that is interference in Iran's domestic affairs. But that's exactly the argument Iranian